Well, in terms of handicapping the race at this point, as we're on the doorstep of the caucuses and primaries, you see once again somebody coming forward on the Republican side of the ledger challenging Mitt Romney for front-runner status. In this case, it's Newt Gingrich. And the question is going to be whether he can sustain that or whether he's going to recede like the other challengers had who'd surged earlier. My view of that is Newt's a strong candidate, but the question is going to be, can he sustain this surge? Does he have the organization, the discipline, and does his record warrant his status as front-runner for the Republican nomination for President of the United States? Mitt Romney, on the other hand, the other front-runner, somebody who's been steady throughout, is somebody who's been very disciplined, both organizationally in terms of message, but hasn't yet been able to fully get the full Republican coalition on his side. Needs to do that if he's going to be a successful nominee. And that's what it's going to come down to. I think the others will certainly play a role, but I don't see anyone else emerging at this point other than those two as the front-runners. The primary and caucus calendar this year is really interesting, and it's different. We've got the usual early events happening in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Florida in January. And then people will assume, well, there's going to be a whole bunch of states in February. But that's not really what happened. Only Michigan and Arizona and Nevada and I think one other are going to occur in February. And then there's a whole big batch in March. So you're going to see this big burst of activity in January and attention, a little less, at least in terms of volume, in February, and then another big burst in March. And that elongates the schedule, at least in degree, differently than in past cycles. And it's going to allow candidates, I think, to stretch out their campaigns if they need to over a longer period of time without facing a whole avalanche of states all at once in February. Well, Republicans like me are hopeful and confident that President Obama will be defeated, but in fairness to the numbers, you got to look at the fact that he's basically tied even with the front-running Republicans in the national polls right now, and that's before he weighs in with what could be $750 million in money, and it's also before the ultimate Republican nominee gets fully identified. And what you see with President Obama's numbers is that they're pretty mediocre. And if he had to just have a referendum on his first-term performance, he may not or probably wouldn't get reelected. So he's going to have to focus pretty substantially on creating negatives around the Republican candidate in order to get reelected. Because if it's a simple referendum on President Obama, particularly in those swing states amongst independent voters where the economy is such a sensitive issue, he probably wouldn't fare too well. But it's not quite that simple. He gets a chance to weigh in with a massive war chest to re-identify, redefine the Republican nominee, and I think that's going to be a big part of his strategy. Well, one way for the country to come together and deal with it is to pick a direction. And if they use the 2012 elections as a way to say this is the direction we want to do and speak decisively about that and give one party control of the Congress plus the presidency, that should remove the barriers that have been gridlock in Washington, D.C. Now, if that doesn't happen, people will say, well, how can we get anything done? Well, I governed as a conservative in one of the most liberal states in the country, Minnesota, the land of McCarthy and Mondale and Humphrey and Wellstone and now Franken, U.S. Senator Franken. So I experienced firsthand what it's like to have divided government, what it means to govern from one party's perspective but have a legislature of a different perspective, and the opportunities and challenges of either finding compromise or in some cases just having to have it out and one side or the other wins. For example, I had the first government shutdown during my time as governor in the 150-year history of my state. It wasn't easy, it wasn't pleasant, but it had to come to that as a way to force action and force resolution, and in fact it did. Well, President Obama made the decision, I think unwisely, to ram through a very large, in my view, misguided piece of health care legislation. It's going to remain at the forefront of the political discussion for a variety of reasons, one of which is the matter is going to be before the U.S. Supreme Court and going to be decided right during the fall of the 2012 election cycle, so that will have a big impact on the election. But it's also going to continue to be on the forefront because it's such a huge part of the economy, and he's taken it in such a dramatic direction that I don't think the country is going to absorb or tolerate it in its current form. I think you're going to see continued friction, continued challenge, because the legislation is unpopular and at least half the country thinks it's misguided. And then beyond all of that, you just have the practical problem of solving the real healthcare crisis. Whether you agree or disagree with President Obama's approach, we should all be able to agree that there is a healthcare crisis in America. The costs are out of reach for too many Americans. The quality needs to be maintained, and we also need to make sure that people have access to healthcare in a reasonable fashion. I don't believe President Obama's proposal will achieve all of that in a wise way, but for those of us who oppose it, we also have to put ideas forward that are a better alternative, and that's what I hope that the Republicans will do once Obamacare is either repealed or overturned. Well, it's important for all of us who have a voice to remind the country and people all across the country how important agriculture remains for the United States of America. The world demand for food is going to double over the next 40 or so years. One of America's great strengths is its incredible productivity and innovativeness and just hard work that our farmers and food processors and others contribute to our economy. So when we think about what are the things that are most important to America and most important to our economy, agriculture, food processing, and related industries can play a huge role for our country going forward. And by the way, it can be a growth industry because of that dramatic increase in world demand for food. And so many people now are removed from the farm in terms of their career or day-to-day work. We need to remind each other, hey, let's remember agriculture. Let's remember the incredible contribution that farmers make to our communities, to our culture, and to our economy. And in Minnesota, in my state, 1 in 5 jobs, roughly, 1 in 5 jobs relate to food processing, agriculture, or related industries broadly defined. And if we can keep that sector healthy and growing, it's going to make a major contribution to the economy at a time where we really need it. And as to the federal government's role in subsidizing agriculture going forward, it's going to change in some ways, but farmers, I think, can't just have the rug pulled out from underneath them overnight. They rely on a certain system. They make plans and investments based on the current system. And as they talk about reforming agricultural subsidies, 2 things. One is, let's make sure that we have farmers at the table and that they understand that things may change, but let's make sure we have reforms that they help design and are comfortable with. And number 2, let's be fair about it, because let's not just pick on the farmers. There's lots of subsidies that we need to look at, and it's unfair to just look at one bucket of subsidies and say, let's deal with the agricultural subsidies and not put the other ones on the table as well. It was a great honor to run for President of the United States. We gave it our best shot, weren't able to get it over the finish line. But to be part of that process, to get to know the other candidates, to be able to speak to the pressing issues facing America and to try to provide leadership and vision to that was a tremendous opportunity. I wish my campaign would have gone further, but we gave it our best shot, and I'm glad I participated in the process. But one of the things I've learned running for President of the United States is this is a great country, not because of the government, but because of the values and strength of the people. Travel this great country and people come up and tell you some amazing stories and some insights. And I love to share those as part of my speeches. I remember, for example, this individual coming up to me in New Hampshire, and she was a social worker who had worked 44 years, and she was retiring. And I said, can you give me one lesson, one thought that you'd give a policymaker from somebody who's been on the front line of social challenge or dysfunction for 40+ years? And she said, yeah. She said, Governor, we need a safety net, particularly for those who are disabled. But we can't have such generous social programs that it allows people to have the option of not doing anything. And for people, she said, people who are able-bodied and are able, we've got to get them motivated. And if you take away every last increment of responsibility or every last increment of accountability, every last increment of industriousness, because the government provides it all, she said, not all, but some people will just check out. And she said, that's what's happening in part. And I thought it was an amazing statement coming from somebody who'd spent 4 decades in social work. And those stories repeat themselves all across the country.
It's a human business legacy we want to leave behind us.